Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this episode we're going to be looking at fitting brake pads and brake discs to a Mercedes SLK on the R172 chassis. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're purchasing the discs for this model is that there's two different sizes of discs. You have a 322mm disc for the model without the AMG Sports Pack, and you have a 344mm disc for the model with the AMG Sports Pack. So just be aware of that before you purchase them. So let's have a quick look at the parts we're going to be fitting today before we head outside and fit them to the vehicle. On this vehicle we're going to be fitting Brembo pads and discs. Now, in the box you will have 4 pads, and 2 of them will have a clip on the back. Now you'll see why in a little while. Then you should also have a pack of new slider bolts as well. Now also it's worth noting as well that these pads do fit both sizes of discs that I was just talking about. Now onto the discs. Now this particular model that we're fitting these discs to is the one with the AMG Sport Pack, so they are a pretty sizable disc. Let's take a quick look at what you have inside. So you have the disc, and you should also have a new captive bolt, which we'll see what that's for in a little while. Okay, it's time to head outside and fit them to the vehicle. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is under the bonnet. If you look just at the back here, you'll find the brake fluid reservoir, and what you want to do is take the cap off of that just to allow for the fluid to rise up when you retract the pistons on the calipers, which you will see in a little while. Once you've removed the brake reservoir cap, you're going to want to jack the vehicle up, remembering to slacken the bolts on the wheel before you do so, just so it's easier to take the wheel off once the wheel's in the air. Once you've removed the wheel, you should put something under the vehicle to support it from dropping on you. In this case, I'm going to be using an axle stand. Right just there, if you can see that, under the lower arm. Okay, so now the vehicle's secure, it's probably worth pointing out the reason I'm changing the pads and the discs on this particular vehicle. It looks like a previous owner has actually fitted the incorrect size discs. This vehicle takes a 344mm disc, and they look like they've fitted the 322mm. As you can see here, with this quite large lip on the disc. And I'll also show you what it's done to the pads as well once I've removed them. But anyway, at this point you're going to want to turn the steering to the left, just so it's easier to access the bolts behind the caliper. And obviously if you're working on the other side of the vehicle, you want to turn the steering to the right. Now you've turned the steering to the left, it's time to remove the spring on the front of the caliper, which is just here. To do that, you're going to need a flathead screwdriver. Firstly, you want to remove this black cover, which is just over the front of the spring, just gently, and it should pop off. It's got 2 little clips on the back there. And then you want to remove the spring, which it will most likely ping off. You just got to be careful it don't ping you in the face. Once you've removed the spring, it's time to unplug the brake pad wear sensor. The brake pad wear sensor is located right just here. Just a little plug, just give it a wiggle and it'll pop out just like that. Next, you're going to want to undo the caliper slider bolts, which are located on the back just here. To remove these 2 bolts, which are located just here, and if I move this out of the way, just here, you're going to need a 13mm spanner or a 13mm socket. In my case, I'm going to use a 13mm socket. One. 2. Once you've removed these bolts, you're going to want to give the whole caliper a bit of a twist backwards and forwards to loosen it off a little bit on the pads, just like that. And that will allow you to remove the caliper. Now we can go ahead and remove this outer pad. If you have any difficulties removing this pad, you can just give it a small knock with a small hammer and it will just drop out. Once you've removed this pad, you're going to need a tool, something similar to this, or you can use a G-clamp. It's entirely up to you. The reason you need this is quite a fiddly part of the job actually. You need to fit the clamp onto the pad that's already in there and clamp it up to retract the piston. Once the piston is fully retracted, as you can see just like this, you can then go ahead and remove this pad, which is actually clipped into the piston. by the clips there. At this point I can show you the pad, what it's done to it by fitting the wrong size disc. You can see here on the outside edge here, there's quite a big lip where that was overhanging on the edge of the disc. This is why it's important to get the correct size disc for your vehicle. Now at this stage it's advisable to rest the caliper up here out of the way, and you may want to use some cable ties to cable tie it to something above just to make sure it doesn't drop down. You don't want to damage the brake pipe, which can be quite delicate. Once you've done that, it's time to remove the caliper frame. You're going to need an 18mm socket or an 18mm spanner to do this. The two 18mm bolts are located just here and just here. Now they're going to be really tight, so you may need to get an extended bar for this part. Now the reason I used a spanner there was just to undo the bolts, and then I will use a ratchet to take them all the way out. Once you've removed both the bolts, you can then go ahead and remove the brake caliper framework. Once you've done that, you can now go ahead and remove the disc. To do so, you're going to need a T30 Torx bit, just like this one. And you're going to want to remove this little bolt just here. It shouldn't be too tight. You may want to keep hold of that little bolt for the new discs, because I have just noticed in the packet, for some unknown reason, they've actually provided the incorrect bolts to put the new discs on, so keep the original ones. Now you can go ahead and fit the new disc, making sure that you line up this little bolt hole just here, obviously with the little screw hole on the hub, which can be a little tricky sometimes. Now when you do this bolt up, you don't want to do it up too tight. Just nip it up. It's only a retaining bolt to hold the disc in position when you put the wheel on. Once the wheel's bolted on, obviously your 5 hub bolts will then hold the disc in position. Now once you've fitted the disc, you can go ahead and fit the brake caliper framework back into position. Before you put the bolts back in, it's always worth putting a little bit of thread locker on the bolts just to secure them, to make sure they don't work themselves loose. Once you've screwed both of these bolts in hand tight, you're going to want to torque them up to 115 Newton meters with a torque wrench. Once you've torqued the bolts up to the correct torque setting on the caliper framework, you're going to want to take your new pads. On the pad with the clip on the back, you're going to want to fit the sensor. Now it will only go in one way, so it shouldn't be too difficult to work out. Just pop that in there into the hole, like so. On the second pad, you will notice there's actually a sticky back on this one, and remove that off there, and then we can go ahead and fit the pads into the caliper. So now you have the caliper in your hand, you want to take the first pad with a sticky back and the little locating lug, and you want to fit that into the caliper first, locating the lug into the caliper just like so, and the sticky back should help you hold it there. Now you want to take your second pad with the clip in the back of it, pop that clip into the piston on the caliper, taking care not to damage the wire on the sensor. Just pop the sensor wire through this little gap just here, and then you should be able to pop the pad into the piston just like so. Once you've got both the pads in, you can then slot the whole caliper back over the disc with the pads on, just like so. Now you may struggle to get this caliper all the way on because of the 2 sliders on the back. You're going to want to try and retract this little, just here, this slider. You want to retract that backwards this way, so that will slot over here. It's very difficult to show you, but just like that, you can see that. Now remember, you actually have a second slider at the bottom. You slide that back and then it'll drop on just like so. Now around here, you'll notice there's actually like lugs sticking out just here. And you just need to make sure that your pads are hooked around these lugs correctly, top and bottom, front and back. Once you've lined it up, you can take the new bolts which come in the packet with the pads and insert them. Now you won't need to put any thread locker onto these bolts, as they already come on it. You may have to give the caliper a little wiggle just to get the bolt started on the thread, just like so. That's the top one and the bottom one. Now you're going to want to torque these caliper slider bolts up to 35 Newton meters. They're nowhere near as tight as the previous bolts for the framework itself. Once you've tightened the caliper slider bolts up, you're then going to want to plug in the brake pad wear sensor, just like so. It just pushes in, it doesn't clip or anything, so just make sure it's pushed all the way in, and that should hold itself securely there. Now we want to come back round the front to refit the caliper spring. Now this can be a little bit tricky actually, this part. The best way I find, if you sit it in position just like so, sitting forwards, you're going to want to press the centre of the spring so it comes all the way back, and then put your thumb on the front to push it in, just like so. And then make sure it's seated correctly, top and bottom. Once you've fitted the spring, you can then fit the protective cover back on. It just pops on, give it a nice little knock, and there you go, done. Now you can straighten the steering back up and fit the wheel back onto the vehicle. Once you've got the wheel back on the vehicle, you can go ahead and let the jack down, but first remembering to remove the axle stand that you put under the vehicle earlier on to support the vehicle. Once you've dropped the vehicle down, remember to fully tighten the 5 bolts up on the wheel. Once you've tightened the wheel bolts up, you're going to want to start your vehicle up and pump the brake pedal a few times. Once you've done that, you're going to want to check the brake fluid reservoir. As you can see in this case, it's a little bit full, obviously where you've retracted the pistons on both of the calipers. All you need to do is just remove a small amount of the fluid from the top, out of the cap, just like so, and that should be fine. Once you've removed some of the fluid, you can then go ahead and replace the cap. And there you have it, job complete. Okay, now you've finished, you're going to want to take it easy on your first drive out to allow the pads to bed into the discs. I hope this video has helped you out in some way, and if so, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you get notified each time I upload. Until next time guys, take care.